I'm the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about Henri Bergson's book, Time and Free Will. Time, see what's become of me while I look around for my possibilities, sings Simon & Garfunkel. But if left to Henri Bergson, he might have changed the words to duration. Published in 1889, Time and Free Will is Bergson's PhD thesis and first book. His aim in this book is to discuss human freedom, but to do so, he first needs to explain his theory of how our consciousness works. As an aside, to be able to understand the later works of this important thinker, it is quite important to nail down the foundational concepts, which Bergson will continue to use throughout his work, a key one being his distinction between time and duration. Duration differs from objective time and is a function of human consciousness. To properly understand what he is proposing on human consciousness, we need to have an overview of what are the other ways consciousness has been understood. Immanuel Kant, in his critique of pure reason, explained that we can never get to the true reality of the thing in itself, since all we have when we perceive something is its representation. In perception, reality is mediated through the medium of our consciousness to give us representations and never the thing in its true reality. We are essentially seeing the world through the lens of our consciousness, and hence what we see is not how things really are, but an image that has been filtered through our consciousness. This is just like how if we don blue spectacles, everything we see appears bluish. The spectacles are the analog for our consciousness, except that these spectacles cannot be taken off. They are welded to our faces the way our consciousness is something we cannot help using when perceiving the external world. Empiricism is another approach that Bergson wants to counter. In an attempt to systematize and reduce concepts to the measurable and the testable, empiricists draw equivalences between the intensive and the extensive. They represent inner states of consciousness as external states of things, and understand time through spatial concepts, through a kind of analogy that seems to work for practical and utilitarian purposes. However, we have to remember that analogues and metaphors are not the same as their subject, even if they bear resemblances or aid our understanding of the subject. Through a process of abstraction and symbolization, in order to aid manipulation and calculation, scientists likewise represent our sensations through symbols. Though Bergson does not name Descartes specifically in Time and Free Will, I think the Cartesian problem of mind-body duality, which is a more limited form of the difference between the material and the immaterial, can help us understand the problem that Bergson sees in the way we understand the world and ourselves. Descartes talks about two kinds of beings, the res extensa and the res cogitans. The res extensa is the extended being, a being which is extended in space and hence has three spatial dimensions. We can think of it as a physical object which has spatial extension. The res cogitans is the mental being, the psyche of a conscious being. The human body is an example of res extensa, and Descartes is among the first to suggest that we can understand its workings as a series of mechanisms integrated into a machine. This image has become familiar to us when we consider, for instance, the organ of the heart as a hydraulic pump with a series of valves. But the idea was novel when Descartes talked about it in the 17th century. Such references to machines can be a useful metaphor to aid our understanding, but once again, we have to keep in mind that they are ultimately metaphors and not the actuality. The problem that Descartes raised is how something immaterial like our souls, or call it minds and consciousnesses, communicate with the physical body such that they are unified and in sync. Materialist answers this problem by positing that everything is material, and by everything they really mean everything, including the soul and things we normally will consider as immaterial, such as thoughts or numbers. As we shall see, Bergson will rise to the challenge of the materialists. The physical sciences have adopted the mechanical machine view of the body, representing human sensations as a kind of force, giving them symbols, signs and names, and hence quantifying the phenomena. Over time, we begin to understand our sensations through these symbols, signs, words, and analogies, rather than through our actual inner experience. These forms of symbols, signs, words, and analogues then begin to shape our inner experience. So as to get to the true reality, psychology needs to remove the effects of these forms so that we can get back to our inner experiences. Bergson will carry out this removal through three concepts: intensity, duration, and freedom. Is mental phenomena a quality or a quantity? Can our feelings be measured in units, like how a person is so many times as sad when their child died compared to how they felt when their pet bird died? Is the intensity of a person's feeling a quantity? By intensity, Bergson is talking about what is happening inside the subject. The emphasis of his meaning is the in intensity. By contrast, extensity is what is happening in the three dimensions of space, in the external world. Bergson believes that our states of consciousness are pure quality. When we try to comprehend them, to grapple with them, we translate them into the spatial terms of quantity. By quantity, we mean measures such as lengths or volumes, which are extensions in space, that is, extensities. For instance, container A contains 1 liter of water, and to contain 2 liters of water, we need a container twice the volume of container A. Do feelings work the same way? Is the container for the feeling of sadness when one's pet bird dies so many times smaller than the container for the feeling of sadness when one's child dies? We do not think of the inner feelings or sensations of inanimate objects when we study them. For instance, if we study what happens when we kick a ball, we consider only their measurable and extended effects. How far the ball flies, the compression of the volume of the ball, its mass, etc., and not the force in itself. In fact, we see the force in itself as simply the quantifiable effects of force and nothing more, with these quantifiable effects expressed as magnitudes with units of newtons in this case. However, when we study consciousness, is it valid to make the same maneuver? If magnitude outside you is never intensive, intensity within you is never magnitude, Bergson deduces. Thinkers have tried to resolve this difficulty by postulating that there are two kinds of quantities, an extensive quantity and an intensive quantity. But such quantification implies that intensities increase and decrease, and taking that further, it suggests that we can know how much it increases or decreases. We feel sadder when our child dies compared to our pets, but can we really quantify that and say it is so many times more sad? Is the intensity of our feelings a magnitude? Bergson thinks not. To be able to have the concept of magnitude, a number or a multiplicity, we require a homogeneous medium to place multiple things in. This medium is space, a conceptually empty place where different things can be placed in it. In space, physical objects can exist alongside one another and be distinct from one another. However, states of consciousness do not conceptually fit so well into this medium, since the states permeate one another and are not necessarily as distinct from one another as objects are in space. While we may visualize the various states of mind the same way we visualize physical objects in space, that is, as distinct, and conceive of each state with linguistic symbols such as happiness, sadness, etc., but they are in actuality not always distinct. For example, we may be happy to see our children get married, but also sad that they will be leaving our homes to form their own household. A science-minded person may try to quantify this in terms of utility. 60 units of utility from the happy feeling minus 10 units of disutility from the sadness to give us 50 units of utility. But if we think about it, the quantity of 50 units of utility does not quite capture how our sense of happiness is shaded or modified by this sadness. It fails to capture the quality of that happy feeling. We may be hungry and eat a good meal, which we may quantify as giving us 50 units of utility, but if asked to compare the two events of marriage and a meal, we would find that comparison facetious. It is because magnitudes and quantities, simple reductions to a number, fail to capture the shades and complexity of our inner experiences. It creates false equivalences. But yet, in order to help our understanding of the world and ourselves, we may resort to naming our sensations and quantifying them. In Bergson's words, when we do this, what we are doing is tantamount to substituting the symbol of the ego for the ego itself. To capture this idea, Bergson makes a critical distinction between time and duration. When he refers to time, he means an objective or scientific time where each division of it is equal to another. For instance, 1 minute lasts as long as another minute, whether that 1 minute is in 1914 as the First World War was breaking out, or in the last minute of the millennium as we cross over to the year 2000. It can be measured and hence quantified. For example, 5 minutes is 5 times as long as 1 minute. Duration, on the other hand, is a quality, what he terms a qualitative multiplicity. Each moment in our lives is different from another. They are not distinct from one another. An earlier moment may influence how subsequent moments feel. For instance, Romeo may feel that the moments he has with Juliet are too brief, while moments away from her stretch out too long. How time feels before and after he has first met her seems different in its length, even though objectively, 1 minute remains as long as it ever was, that is, 60 seconds. When Bergson wants to talk about human time, or time not as an objective measure, but as experienced by our consciousness, he uses the term duration. Outside of our consciousness, of our conscious experience, there exists only the present time. Time of the past has already elapsed and is gone, and the future time is yet to happen. Objectively, we only have the present instance or moment, and everything that exists at that instance exists in that instance simultaneously. However, our subjective experience of our lives, of duration, tells us that what has occurred in the past continues to affect the present and the future. For instance, a year ago, measured by objective time, my child passed away. Today, a year later, I still feel the effects of that event, even though in this present moment, that child does not exist. Only what exists in this moment exists. The moments of objective time do not succeed one another. Instead, they lie as if in space like objects next to one another, distinct, separated, and unconnected. The image of such time is a series of dots on the timeline, which is literally a line we draw in a spatial plane, as if time was just another spatial quantity. We observe outside us, at a given moment, a whole system of simultaneous positions. Of the simultaneities which have preceded them, nothing remains, Bergson writes. Each moment in objective time is a new moment. However, in our inner experience, we feel that moments succeed one another because they affect and interpenetrate one another. This experience of the passage of time is what Bergson calls duration. If not for our conscious experience of duration, each moment is simply a new moment, unaffected by previous ones. In consciousness, we find states which succeed, without being distinguished from one another, and in space, simultaneities, which, without succeeding, are distinguished from one another, notes Bergson. Earlier states of consciousness melt into later ones in such a way that breaks between them can be hard to find, compared to physical objects in space which are clearly separated from one another. However, physical objects do appear to us to change over time, in what appears as a seamless change. In such a change, what we have is a hybrid or mixed idea of what is happening. As an arrow flies, the account in objective time is that at t equals to 1, the arrow is at point A, and at t equals to 2, the arrow is at point B. Just as a cinematic video camera captures images at 24 frames per second and then plays it back at that rate, our minds interpret these rapid succession of distinct images displayed on the screen to be objects in continuous motion. It is our mental processing that the objects in the image seem to be moving smoothly. Slow it down to say 10 frames a second, and that illusion is lost. We will register the objects in the images as static. Because of this mixed conception, we think of time passing as a series of succession of simultaneities, but this is a result of our consciousness processing a series of static occurrences over instances of time into a flow of motion over duration. Science retains nothing of motion itself but the position of the moving body, that is, immobility, explains Bergson. It is why Zeno's paradox is a paradox. How can a moving arrow ever get to its target since it is static at any particular instance of time? This paradox owes its paradoxical nature to the scientific description of motion, which is a series of static positions at particular instances of time. This scientific view or way of investigation has contaminated how we view inner phenomena also. It seems adequate once the inner phenomena has been developed. For instance, at t equals to 0, my pet bird dies. At t equals to 10 seconds, I felt sad. But it is inadequate to express the development of my state of mind. Between t equals to 0 and 10, my sadness was not just nothing up to the 10th second and then a full-blown feeling when the 10th second commenced. It was developing. Perhaps I was conflicted since it is after all just a bird, but on the other hand it was not just any bird but mine. But it died from old age and it did not suffer, so perhaps I should be glad, but I miss it and so I am not glad. These thoughts may have been occurring to me between 0 and 10 seconds. These feelings, these thoughts which we collectively call states run into one another. They interpenetrate and we cannot separate them from each other. I myself am changing as these various thoughts cross my mind. There is a qualitative multiplicity at play. There is a heterogeneity in the medium of duration. One moment is not the same as another, the way a medium like space can be uniform or homogeneous. Consider the space in front of you. Take a 1 by 1 by 1 cm cube of space that is right in front of your eyes. Take another that is just next to that cube. They are similar. The air molecules contained in them are different, but the medium of space itself are the same, indifferent to what fills it. Objective time is analogous to space, where it is a medium which is indifferent to what fills it, but the human experience of time is not indifferent to how their time is filled. That psychological experience of time is what Bergson terms duration. Duration does not have that homogeneity. Each moment is conditioned by previous moments. In his book Time and Free Will, Bergson is laying down all these concepts so that he can discuss human freedom based on these foundations. He briefly outlines the determinist account. The question of whether we have free will is answered with a definitive no by the determinists, since they believe that every effect is a result of a prior cause. If the initial conditions of the universe are known, every single position and property of every single atom at the moment of the beginning, and if there was a powerful enough computer to calculate the resulting interactions and to do so over time, the future could be foreseen. Everything will be determined, and hence there is no free human agency. However, according to Bergson, there is another group who attempts to define free will, and by trying to do so, ends up denying the existence of free will as well. This group accepts the question of the determinists. If we do have knowledge of the initial conditions and know all the positions and properties of every atom, could we foresee what will happen next? But in even accepting the question in this form, they already admit that this totality of conditions could be conceived as given in advance. They accept the position of the determinists, that if we know the conditions, we can from them derive the subsequent effects, even if this is only possible in theory. It is tantamount to treating duration as a homogeneous medium like space, and to treat duration as quantifiable. They may cite the principle of conservation of energy, which is applicable to the external world since moments of time are equal to one another, but believe that it also applies to conscious beings. For conscious beings, each moment of duration is different from the other, where later moments are informed and hence enriched by the content of prior ones. Only if we accept that duration is time, that is, a homogeneous medium like space, can determinism hold true. Since our lived experience of time is heterogeneous duration, all determinism would thus be refuted by experience, but every attempt to define freedom will open the way to determinism, asserts Bergson. Accepting the premises implicit in the way the question of human free will is posed by the determinists may lead us to a determinist conclusion that there is no free will. Why do we not need to accept the determinists' premises? Because the repeatability of cause and effect of determinism does not hold for human beings, according to Bergson. If you strike a ball with a bat in the exact same spot in the exact same way, the result will be the same. The ball will fly and land at the exact same place, all else being equal. That is because the ball and bat remain the same physical objects governed by the laws of physics. In contrast, a person's response will not be like that. Hit a person the first time and their response may be one of shock and pain. The second time round, the person's response would have been conditioned by the first time. They may raise their arm to block the blow. Their shock may turn to rage. Their reaction would not be the same. The cause, the bat swinging, is the same, but the effect differs because the mental state of the first and second time are different. The mental state will never repeat itself because it is informed by its previous experiences, which manifest as previous mental states. Hence, the physical sciences are unable to handle human affairs since its mathematical approach is unable to deal with duration. All the relations which cannot be translated into simultaneity, that is, into space, are scientifically unknowable, summarizes Bergson. The aim of science is to forecast and measure. This aim is amenable to physical objects which are quantifiable in their properties. However, this quantification does not work for people, since lived experiences of conscious beings are qualities which are not expressible as magnitudes. However, we continue to adopt the quantification because it then allows us to employ the methods of science on them. By treating our experiences and sensations as if they were objective things, and hence can be distinguished from one another and are solid instead of amorphous, we can then give them names, and we can manipulate these symbols theoretically or mathematically to further our understanding of them or predict outcomes. It seems then that there are two selves, the fundamental self and its spatial and social representation. We can only get to the real self, the fundamental self, through deep introspection, which leads us to grasp our inner states as living things which are constantly becoming. Because we are constantly becoming, these states are not amenable to measure since they permeate one another. The moments of these states of consciousness succeed one another dynamically, enriching later moments in a way that scientific or objective time does not account for. However, we make such a realization rarely, more often adopting the mode of representation, just so that we can treat these states using language with its signs and symbols and calculate our moves as if they obey the laws of physics the way inanimate objects do. Bergson calls this associationism, where we associate our states of mind with a linguistic symbol. When we do this, according to Bergson, we mistake the symbolical representation of the ego with the ego itself. If we persist, we are in effect reconstructing ourselves based on the understanding derived from the artificiality of the symbolic representation and its contrived relations. The very mechanism by which we only meant at first to explain our conduct will end by also controlling it, Bergson warns. The same way repeated actions form habits which are hard to break. The result will be that we live for the external world rather than for ourselves. We speak rather than think. We are acted rather than act ourselves. We will lose our freedom as such automatism takes over. To retain our freedom, to act freely, is to recover possession of oneself and to get back into pure duration, he writes. While it is tempting to understand ourselves in a scientific way of the associationist, we know empirically that such a way is not true when we consider how we make serious decisions, when we are in unique moments that will not be repeated in our lives. We may find that words are inadequate to express our decision process. In our reconstruction of the process, where we break it down into simpler steps, we are unable to express the steps leading to each other by a law, such as the laws of science. It is common to hear people say, "If I knew then what I know now, my decision would have been different," for instance with regard to their career choices or choice of life partner. What we know in the past is different from what we know at the present moment. Our decisions may be different simply because our experiences will have accumulated and inform our decisions. Without having yet had these experiences, our earlier decisions will obviously not have been informed by them and hence may be different. Our mental states are different at each moment of duration. They are unique and will never occur again simply because later moments will have within them accumulated experiences unavailable to earlier moments. In this way, Bergson dismantles the arguments of determinism against free will. Inanimate objects obey cause and effect in a determined way. By contrast, our consciousness is conditioned not by objective time, but by our duration of accumulated experiences, which mean that the effect may not remain the same even if the cause does. This makes us different from inanimate objects, free from the determined outcomes of cause and effect, since our mental states do not remain static but are shaped by previous experiences. Thank you.